The fading light was the first to show Jono Pritchard how tired he was. His tired eyes wanted to close as his old, but powerful SUV ate up the miles on the way to his hometown. He had been on the road for 6 hours straight, with 3 more to go, so stopping soon was only a matter of prudence. Half an hour later, headlights illuminated a billboard advertising a hotel and restaurant, which in turn reminded his brain of hunger. Jono grabbed a bottle of mineral water from the empty passenger seat and took a sip, hoping it would help curb his hunger for a while. 10 minutes later, he slowed down and turned onto the wide driveway leading to the well-lit complex. He wondered what such a large hotel was doing in the middle of nowhere, but soon the headlights illuminated the outline of a golf course nearby, and the answer became obvious. The front parking lot was full, so Jono followed the signs to the back of the hotel, where additional parking was located. His plan was to grab a bite to eat and take a short nap in the parking lot before heading out again. After stretching his tired legs next to his SUV, Jono entered the hotel lobby and headed to the bathroom to freshen up. Standing in front of the large mirror, he combed his hair and straightened his wrinkled shirt. Overall, it looked good for a weary traveler. Returning to the lobby, he asked for directions to the restaurant and followed the directions down a long hallway filled with the aromas of grilled meat. The restaurant was crowded, but hunger did not allow him to abandon the idea. Joining the small line at the meat department, Jono patiently watched as the chef expertly carved beef, pork, and a large turkey. His attention wandered until he caught a pleasant scent behind him and turned around to find its source. Jono met the gaze of a striking blonde standing nearby. He wanted to turn away, but instead he smiled and held his gaze. "Hello," he said. "Hello to you too," she replied. "If I had known that I would have to stand in line, I would have been better off continuing to drive," he commented, not knowing what else to say. "Come on, I think it's worth it," she replied. "Are you local or passing through?" "Passing from the coast. And you?" "I'm kind of local. I live an hour from here. I came with my husband. He is now at a business meeting upstairs." They chatted about trifles, slowly moving towards the table with food. Jono opted for an open-faced beef and lettuce sandwich and a large Coke to keep him from falling asleep at the wheel. After he paid, he had to look for an empty seat, but eventually found a small table at the back of the restaurant. He watched as the blonde also looked for a seat, at which point he was able to get a good look at her figure. She was of average height. Her tight black dress emphasized her ample breasts, narrow waist, and slender hips. It was hard to tell her age. She was probably already in her 40s, which was 10 years older than himself, but she still looked stunning. As she came closer, Jono raised his hand to get her attention and pointed to the empty chair across from him. She gave him a beautiful smile and placed her plate on the table. Jono noticed a bottle of red wine next to her food. "Do you mind?" she asked, sitting down. "Of course not. I hate eating alone in restaurants." She laughed. "I know this feeling. For a woman, it's even worse. All the men think you're looking for adventure. My name is Gracie." "Nice to meet you, Gracie. My name is Jono." While they ate, they continued their conversation. The conversation soon became more personal, with hints of flirting, which quickly raised the tension between them to new levels. "Would you like a glass of wine?" she asked. "I feel a little guilty that I drink and you don't." "No, thank you. I still have to go, and I'm already tired." Gracie took a small piece of salad and, after thinking for a moment, asked, "So what are you doing on the coast?" "I work as a carpenter, and on weekends I help at the local rescue club." "So that's where this tan and body come from," she noted. "Yes, I just love the beach, the sun and big waves. And you, Gracie, what do you do?" "Well, I guess you could say I'm a kept woman. My husband is a successful businessman, and I don't need to lift a finger. I just spend money and try to look good." "Well, you're doing great. You look great from this side of the table." Gracie leaned back in her chair and laughed. "Damn, you're a flatterer. If I had known that you would please me so much, I would have paid for your dinner. So I guess you're the kind of guy who saves all the damsels in distress from drowning." "I would like to. Mostly these are teenagers children, or their not very athletic parents. Her face contorted with skepticism. I don't believe it for a second. You can't tell me that all these young free girls aren't at least some motivation. I can imagine some sweet young lady falling at your feet after you saved her from a terrible death. You'd be surprised, Jono replied, a little embarrassed. No, I wouldn't be surprised. Put your hand on your heart and tell me that they have never tried to thank you in this way. He shook his head. I don't think you need to know that. She leaned closer. Oh, how necessary. 10 minutes ago I was bored, but now I'm looking forward to the rescuer's juicy stories. Jono told her about an incident that happened 6 months ago. He pulled an attractive brunette named Susie out of the current. Usually those rescued prefer to leave quickly, but Susie stayed to say thank you. A few days later, she offered to buy him dinner as a token of gratitude, and after some convincing he agreed. When he arrived at her place, she was in the backyard pool. Susie gave him a sly smile, dove under the water, and raised her hand to show the international drowning signal. Jono instantly understood the hint. Quickly taking off his clothes down to his underpants, he jumped into the water. Their rescue operation ended in a rather revealing development of events. Gracie laughed cheerfully after hearing the story and tried to find out more details, but Jono avoided answering, becoming even more embarrassed. She enjoyed his embarrassment and, looking at him, thought that she had always had a weakness for young men with beautiful bodies. Gracie was married to a man 25 years older than her, and although he tried to satisfy her, even resorting to medication, the spontaneity in their sex life had long since disappeared. On the other hand, she had a great life, a luxurious home, a sports car, trips abroad, and a loving husband who allowed her to spend money as she pleased. However, while talking to Jono, Gracie felt desire ignite within her. Her fantasies began to take her somewhere far away until she heard the phone ringing. Excusing herself, she answered the call, but quickly ended the conversation with a few words of irritation. Sorry, it was my husband. He said he would be staying for a long time, so you will have to endure my company for a while longer. That's great, Jono smiled. I enjoy your company. As I said, it's not often you get to dine with such a beautiful lady. Gracie laughed. Lord, you are simply a master of compliments. Although most people would probably think you were having lunch with your mom. I don't think so. So you are not embarrassed by the company of a woman older than you? She asked defiantly. I love beautiful women. Age has nothing to do with it. I think women worry more about age differences than men. Is it true? Her eyes narrowed. Yes. Most men will jump at the chance to be with an older woman if she is attractive. But women may think about seducing a young man, but will not dare to go further. Gracie thought, sipping from an almost empty glass of wine. Maybe, but this woman loves young men, and I wouldn't hesitate. Jono laughed. Like I said, you might think about it, but you still won't dare. Her eyes narrowed, and she leaned closer. Fine. How about fast? Right now in your car. It is clearly not possible to use the rooms here. Jono looked at her in surprise, wondering if she was joking, but her face made it clear that she was serious. I hope you're not just talking about it, Gracie added with a playful smile. No, I'm ready if you are too, he replied, feeling his arousal intensify. Do you have a condom? Jono shook his head, but then remembered that he had seen a condom dispenser in the men's bathroom. He told Gracie about it, and she gave him a mischievous smile. Go and check. I'll wait here. Jono quickly stood up from the table and headed to the bathroom. Gracie watched him, feeling her anticipation grow. A minute later, he returned and shook his head with a dissatisfied look. The damned car is empty, he muttered. Gracie leaned closer thoughtfully. Perhaps they are in the women's bathroom. But I don't want anyone to see me when I buy them. I can watch the door and tell you when no one is there, Jono suggested. Gracie smiled and grabbed her purse, heading towards the girl's bathroom after he signaled to her that the way was clear. A few minutes later, she returned to the table and showed off her find with a smile. We're lucky. The machine in the women's room was full. Jono responded with a wide grin. Gracie moved closer and said quietly, "Before we do this, I have conditions. This will only be one time, okay? I'm not going to date you again. No bites and no marks. Take care of my dress, and the condom does not come off even for a second." "I agree," he nodded. "Fine. Where's your car?" "Behind the back door, at the very end of the parking lot. Red SUV." She nodded and winked. "You go first, and I'll come in a minute." Jono stood up and left the restaurant. He sat in the car and waited for her to arrive, worried that it might be a joke. But a few minutes later, he noticed her figure under the light of the parking lights. He flashed his headlights and Gracie quickly walked over to the car, sitting in the front passenger seat. "It's too bright here. Let's move further away," she suggested. Jono started the car and headed to the back of the parking lot. He soon noticed an open gate leading to a small dirt path. He turned there and stopped behind a group of trees. "Is this suitable?" he asked. "Just perfect," she whispered, leaning towards him and kissing him. "Let's not waste time." Sex has always played a big role in Gracie's life, and she has tried almost everything. "Thank you for this," she whispered. "It was a very pleasant break from my usually boring sex life. It's good that you don't live close, otherwise you would be too great a temptation to ignore." 10 minutes later, they returned to the already half-filled restaurant and the same table. After going to the toilet to check her appearance, Gracie returned and ordered an apple cinnamon tart and a glass of red wine. She grinned across the table at Jono, who was eating a large piece of chocolate mousse cake. Nothing much was said during the meal. Both were happy with each other's company and their little secret. Suddenly, the restaurant became quiet and Jono and Gracie looked up. Their eyes quickly found the source of interest. A tall, well-dressed man in a black suit was examining the visitors. He was accompanied by two large, dangerous men, also in dark suits. Jono turned his attention back to the older man in the center. He seemed familiar but couldn't place him. Eddie Torelli, a famous racketeer, dealer, entrepreneur, and crime boss, looked across the restaurant until his eyes fell on his beautiful Gracie, his heart briefly fluttering as he found the love of his life. His gaze slid and lingered on the man sitting at the table across from her, their eyes meeting as Eddie walked towards their table. "Damn, that's my husband," Gracie muttered to herself. "Just be polite and act calm, for God's sake." Jono instantly realized that he had just had sex with the wife of one of the most dangerous men in the country, his stomach clenching as Eddie approached their table. "Hey, honey, sorry I'm late, but business is business," Eddie said. Gracie smiled at her husband, wiping the last piece of her tart from her lips. "It's okay, Eddie. This is Jono. He kindly gave me a seat at his table when I couldn't find a place to sit." Jono tried to smile as Eddie's eyes, seemingly black, stared into his. Eddie's quick mind was in overdrive as he briefly examined the face of the handsome man he was looking at. He decided to ask Gracie a few questions when the time came. He then turned to Gracie and smiled. "There are a few of us at the bar. Let's go introduce you to some new friends," he said quietly. Gracie took her bag from the table and stood up. "Thank you for your hospitality, Jono. It was nice meeting you." As Gracie headed towards the bar, Eddie noticed Jono again, their eyes meeting for a moment before Jono looked away. Eddie instinctively felt discomfort, but turned to follow his wife. Jono waited until they had left the restaurant before walking to the door and rushing to his SUV. Luckily, the big engine started when I turned the key. Without turning on the headlights, he slowly pulled the car out of the parking lot and turned them on as soon as he reached the road. He pressed the gas until he reached the highway, then slowed to just above the limiter's speed. His heart began to calm down as he drove further away from the hotel. Jono was confident that if Eddie found out that his wife was with him in the front seat of his SUV, his life would be in serious danger. He recalled recent media reports about the Torelli family, something to do with the intimidation or disappearance of witnesses to a brutal attack outside one of their nightclubs. Jono then recalled that the journalist who wrote a less than flattering version of events and a review of the Torelli family was also beaten and sent to the hospital for his troubles. For some reason, everything went quiet after that. Half an hour from the restaurant, Jono caught up with a white police car and got into it. This was the only time he was satisfied with the presence of police nearby. Over the next hour, he watched in his rearview mirror as other faster cars slowed down at the sight of the police cruiser and pulled in behind him. When he finally reached the driveway of his family home, he turned off the engine and leaned his head against the steering wheel. He listened to the engine cool and thought, maybe I could finally escape. The next morning, 300 miles later, Eddie Torelli woke up with a splitting headache, the result of stress and too much of his favorite ale. He cursed and rubbed his sore head with his hands, and then turned around and saw the empty bed next to him. Looking at the clock on his bedside table, he realized that his early riser, Gracie, had already gone for a run. He rose to a sitting position and waited until he had regained his balance before entering the bathroom. Looking through the closet and drawers in search of painkillers, he found nothing. He cursed angrily and returned to the bedroom in search of Gracie's bag. She always carried aspirin or something similar with her. Having found the bag, he searched it in vain and cursed it again. He turned it upside down and poured the contents onto the unmade bed. His smile grew as his eyes found what he was looking for. He picked up the familiar package and was about to walk away when his gaze fell on something else. He bent down and picked up the small blue and white package and stared at it. Retrieving his glasses from the bed, he put them on and looked at the open and empty condom package. His legs gave way and he sat down on the bed, realizing the consequences of his discovery. The brand of condom packaging was familiar, and he quickly remembered that it was the brand from the hotel vending machine. He remembered the young man sitting with Gracie the night before, and it was obvious what had happened. He was pretty sure that Gracie had a soft spot for younger men. His instincts were right that night. As he looked into Jono's face, he remembered wondering if it was a look of fear or guilt. Now he knew. Tears began to roll down Eddie's face, and he laid his head on his hand and cried, thinking about Gracie's infidelity. After a while, he got dressed and went downstairs to wait for her return. Eddie was a man who always dealt with problems directly, and this was no exception. He remembered Jono as he waited, his face now etched in his memory forever. If he ever saw him again, he would demand a heavy price for his actions. As for Gracie, she should also have her own price. Eddie Torelli sat exhausted in his spacious, raised living room, large picture windows providing a perfect view of the tree-lined street below. His trembling hand still held the open condom package as he waited for his unfaithful wife to return from her morning run. As the head of a crime family, he demanded loyalty from everyone around him, from his advisors, suppliers, and soldiers to the servants who looked after his house. But most of all, he expected loyalty from his beautiful wife, Gracie. Eddie couldn't get the scenes his imagination pictured out of his head. He imagined Gracie spending time with a young man she had met the night before at the hotel. His thoughts were confused as he tried to remember the guy's name, John. Jono. He was sure that this guy was perfect for her. Tall, young, attractive. Eddie looked at the condom package he found in her bag. His anger grew. He tried to concentrate, but images kept popping up in his head again and again, causing him pain. Gracie, with a slight smile on her face, entered the house after her morning run. She placed her athletic shoes by the door, opened the refrigerator, and took out orange juice. "Great run," she said, gulping down her juice. We managed to improve the result, but her joyful mood turned tense when she noticed Eddie's expression. Eddie Torelli stood a few steps away from his wife, still clutching the empty package of condoms, which seemed to glow with an indelible stain of shame. In the silence of their spacious home, furnished with expensive furniture and decorated with works of art, tension grew like a drawn bowstring. Gracie kept her eyes on him, knowing that no matter what happened next, her life would never be the same. "Don't lie to me, don't even dare try," he said quietly, but there was steel in his voice. "I want to know everything. When, where, how, and what were you going to do next?" Gracie swallowed hard. She has seen him in fits of rage and knows how cruel he can be. But she still hoped that by telling the truth, she could minimize the damage. "Eddie, she began, her voice trembling. "I didn't want it to turn out like this. I drank too much wine, and He raised his hand, urging her to shut up. Are you trying to blame it all on the wine? What about how you felt when? He trailed off, barely able to stop himself from swearing. Climbed into that car in the parking lot. Do you think I'm such a fool? She nodded hastily, not knowing what to say. Gracie usually had excuses when it came to softening his anger, but now it seemed to her that no words would save him from trouble. Eddie came closer, his breath fanning her with the scent of the whiskey he drank that morning to relieve his headache. Tell me, he said almost in a whisper, why should I leave everything as it is? Gracie hesitated to answer. Thoughts flashed feverishly through my mind about what might follow. She knew that any attempt to justify herself would only add fuel to the fire. Eddie, she whispered, it's my fault. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I don't know what came over me. He looked at her with cold eyes. In fact, she had already admitted to betrayal, and perhaps hoped that frankness would be accepted as a sign of repentance. But Eddie saw things differently. So you were bored, lonely, had a drink, and decided that a young body was suitable entertainment for the evening. The question sounded mocking and cruel. She knew that if she tried to justify the passing hobby now, she would only infuriate him more. Therefore, she remained silent. Great, he said slowly. It's good that at least you're not lying anymore. I hate lies. They glared at each other for several long seconds, and Eddie's own heartbeat sounded louder and louder in his head. For the first time in his life, he doubted exactly what to do. Perhaps an outside observer would find his jealousy almost touching, but those who knew Eddie realized that if he was cheated on, he reacted not like an offended husband, but like an insulted boss whose property was being stolen. Gracie was not just a wife, she was an expensive thing that he showed off to his friends and partners. He felt like this young guy named Jono, whoever he was laughing in his face. Finally, Eddie took a deep breath and nodded briefly, as if he had made a decision. Okay, I'm not going to lay a hand on you now, he said, as if he was doing a great favor. But you have to understand, this will have consequences, both for you and for him. There will be everything was simply forgotten. Gracie swallowed, not daring to ask what he meant. She knew that some women disappeared if they angered their men too much in the criminal world. But Eddie had feelings for her, albeit ugly, painful ones, but feelings nonetheless. Perhaps this will save her life. She wanted to say something, to ask him to listen, but she realized that any words now would not be of any use. He barked, say no more. It's enough for you to know that he pointed a finger at his chest, will sort it out. And you wait. No nonsense, Gracie. No attempts to escape or contact this. Boy, do you understand me? She nodded. Answer with words. Yes, Eddie, she said quietly. He walked away, and it was as if something had broken in him. His shoulders sank, his gaze became gloomy. Opening the closet door in the living room, he took out his phone. I looked at the screen for several seconds and finally dialed a familiar number. Hello, Bruno. Will you come? There is a matter. Yes, right now. After finishing the short conversation, he put the phone back in his pants pocket and looked at Gracie again. Go to the bedroom. I want you to sit there and keep your head down until I call you. She slowly walked towards the stairs, feeling his gaze on her back, almost physically burning her. Every step echoed in the silence. Gracie understood that this was just the beginning. He never leaves an insult unanswered. Jono, having driven all night, reached his native coastal town while it was still dark. His hands were shaking with fatigue. He had only slept for a couple of hours over the past 24 hours. Stopping at his mother's modest home, he got out of the car and stretched, hoping the cool sea air would invigorate him a little. The silence of the street lined with old palm trees had a calming effect. Entering the house, he found that his mother was already on her feet, although it was not even 6 in the morning. Jono, she said, leaving the kitchen and wiping her hands on a towel. You came back so early. What happened? Nothing, Mom. I was just tired from the road and decided to arrive a day earlier. He tried to speak cheerfully, but there was hidden anxiety in his voice. He couldn't tell her that he'd slept with a crime boss's wife and was now probably setting himself up for mortal trouble. His mother would worry too much, but it might turn out that everything was not so serious, although he himself did not believe in it. "Okay," she smiled, not suspecting anything. "You need to sleep. I'll prepare breakfast, and then you can lie down and rest." "Thank you, Mom," he muttered, and, taking off his shoes, went upstairs to his old room. Everything there remains as it was many years ago. Dark wooden floors, a chip on the edge of the table, surfer posters on the walls. The memories made my chest ache slightly. He collapsed on the bed and stared at the ceiling. Maybe everything will work out, he convinced himself. After all, this Eddie has a lot of things to do, and who knows if he will remember me. But reason dictated, people like Eddie do not forget such humiliation. As he fell asleep, he felt how the anxiety did not go away, but only climbed deeper into the subconscious. Bruno, Eddie's personal problem solver, arrived exactly 40 minutes after the call. He was a strong man in his early 40s, with short cropped hair and the chiseled physique of an ex-military man. There was always a cold calculation in his gaze. This is exactly why Eddie appreciated him. When Bruno entered the living room, Eddie was sitting on the sofa, holding the same ill-fated empty package in his hands. There was a glass of unfinished whiskey on the table. He looked up at the newcomer. "Take a seat," he said dryly, nodding to the chair opposite. Bruno sat down, making himself comfortable, as if he felt at home. "I'm listening, boss." Eddie dropped the package into his lap. "Look, women's room in the hotel. Last night, my wife was having fun with a certain guy. His name is Jono or John Dammit. Gracie didn't specify. I saw him in a restaurant, tall, fit, perhaps about 30. Brown hair, tanned. He left in some old SUV. Bruno listened to the story without expression. Finally, he nodded. "And what do you want, boss?" "Find him," Eddie said dully. "I want to know who he is, where he lives, what he does. I need all the details. And when you find it, call. Don't do anything yourself until I give the go-ahead. Is it clear?" Bruno nodded again. "It's clear." They exchanged short glances in which there was no need for further explanation. Bruno stood up, carefully put the empty condom package in his pocket, and headed towards the exit. "I'll do it, boss." Eddie was left alone. He felt empty. This traitor sat upstairs, awaiting her fate, but in his soul he was already far away from here, in the future moment where he would finally look this guy in the eyes and decide what to do with it. Gracie sat cross-legged on the bed in her bedroom. Time passed slowly. She listened to every sound in the house. What felt like hours passed before she heard the front door open and close again. The car slammed. Silence. She thought she heard Eddie groan or swear briefly, but then everything went silent. She understood that if she went downstairs now without permission, she would only provoke his anger. Therefore, she continued to sit, looking into emptiness. Every time she remembered that night with Jono, her heartbeat involuntarily increased, partly because of the memory itself, how hot, passionate, and unlike her husband he was. But now that memory was saturated with fear. If Eddie finds him. At some point, she wanted to text Jono, to warn him to be on the lookout, to make him disappear, but she knew that Eddie was probably checking her phone. He could intercept messages. Any trick, and she will be literally doomed to mortal retribution. She closed her eyes, regretting her actions, but knowing full well that it was impossible to rewind everything back. Bruno was a first-class detective when it came to finding people. He had connections not only in police agencies, but also among personal informants, petty criminals, taxi drivers, motel and gas station workers who were ready to share almost any information for little money. He began to act quickly. The first thing he did was find a hotel employee who remembered that the woman, a very beautiful blonde, was sitting at the table with some younger man, and then they went out into the courtyard. The same employee later saw a red SUV leave the property and turn onto a dirt road leading to the highway. The second step is a highway surveillance camera. It may not always work properly, but Bruno knows how to talk to the right people. A few hours later, he had a photograph of a red SUV driving through the intersection. The numbers were hard to see, but he still managed to make out 3 of the 4 numbers and a couple of letters. This is often enough to identify a person through common databases, and if you involve friends in the police community in the search, it's a matter of time. By the end of the day, Bruno knew that the red SUV belonged to one John Pritchard, nicknamed Jono, 32 years old, registered in a small town on the coast. The data was confirmed by matching both date of birth and address. Perhaps the purchase of the car was made a couple of years ago. No criminal record, but the database notes that he was once a volunteer on the beach rescue squad. Great, Bruno thought as he dialed Eddie's number. Found it, boss. He's 200 miles away on the coast. Shall we act? Eddie paused briefly, tense as the wind before a storm. No, I'll figure it out myself. But prepare yourself. We'll go there. The next few days passed uneventfully for Jono, except for the fact that an uneasy feeling did not leave him for a minute. He tried to do everyday things, helped his mother, repaired a broken gate, sometimes went to the beach and looked at the waves. But every shadow on the street made him turn around. Every unfamiliar car nearby seemed like a possible threat. He had to decide, leave the city or sit quietly, hoping that it will pass. He didn't have enough money to wander endlessly, but he didn't want to leave his mother. Maybe everything will somehow calm down on its own, he persuaded himself, although he didn't really believe it. In the evening, he went out into the backyard to stack wood for the fireplace. Suddenly, the phone in my pocket was heard ringing. Hello? The male voice on the other end of the line was unfamiliar to him. Is this Jono? Yes, who's talking? There was a short pause. One person wants to see you. We would like to meet on neutral territory. Tomorrow at noon on the pier near the old lighthouse. No nonsense. Otherwise it will be worse. But the voice had already turned off. Jono froze, clutching the phone in his hand. My heart was pounding in my throat. He understood perfectly well that these were most likely Eddie's people. They found me, he thought in panic. But then, with an effort of will, he forced himself to calm down. If they wanted to kill me right away, they would have done it without talking, he reasoned. Maybe he wants to talk. Still, the thought of going to the meeting was terrifying. But not going means forcing them to look for him, and then family and friends may suffer. Eddie probably won't stop. The next morning, Jono rose before dawn. He tossed and turned in bed all night, falling asleep only for short periods. Approaching the mirror, he noticed how tired and exhausted his reflection looked. Nevertheless, he put on a clean shirt and jeans and tried to make his hair look neat. What idiocy, he thought. Why am I going to look decent in front of a man who might want to kill me? He had no choice but to go to the pier. By noon, he was standing on the old planks, listening to the waves crashing against the pilings. It was deserted here, the tourist season was long over, and the lighthouse itself had not worked for many years. The sun's glare played on the surface of the water, but Jono did not notice this beauty. He peered at the approaching cars. Soon an expensive black foreign car pulled up to the pier, which he immediately recognized as guests. 2 large guys dressed in formal suits came out, followed by Eddie Torelli. He was wearing a gray light jacket without a tie, but he still looked respectable and somewhat ominous. Slowly approaching Jono, he stopped a few steps away, crossing his arms over his chest. So you are the same Jono? Yes, the guy answered, trying to remain calm. Eddie looked him over silently, as if assessing how dangerous he was. Then he nodded to one of his thugs, and he stepped back, taking a few steps. The second one seemed to remain on the safety net. I don't know what Gracie told you, Eddie said quietly, but I want you to understand, she's my wife. And you are nobody. Jono felt his insides clench at these words. His pride rebelled. I'm not a nobody, he wanted to shout, but he understood that now every harsh phrase could cost him his life. Look, Mr. Torelli, it was a mistake. I honestly didn't know that she was married, and I certainly didn't want to. He himself got confused in his words, because admitting all this was humiliating. Eddie looked at him with a contemptuous grin. You're lucky I'm not going to kill you right here in front of a seagull, he said quietly. but I'm afraid you won't be able to just leave." He motioned to the second thug. "Did you think that you could take someone else's wife and remain unpunished?" Eddie asked, looking down. "I understand that Gracie is also to blame. But you," he lifted Jono's chin with his finger, forcing him to look him in the eye, "crossed the line." Jono knew that this man was used to solving problems with brute force. He swallowed the lump in his throat and answered as calmly as possible. I, I'm sorry. This won't change anything, but yes, I understand that I made a mistake." "A mistake?" Eddie asked, as if savoring every word. "Mistake. Okay, listen to me carefully. I could kill you, but then I'll have to get my hands dirty with extra blood, explain myself to the police, and now I have a deal on the line. And in general, killing for the sake of cheating on your wife is too primitive, isn't it?" Jono stood up with difficulty, catching his breath. He hoped that he would hear something like, "Go somewhere and don't come back." But deep down I understood. Everything would be more complicated. "So I came up with a way for you to make amends," Eddie continued. "I have one delicate matter on the coast. I'm going to buy land here for a future hotel and casino complex, but there are locals who don't want to sell the plots. You have to help me persuade them. If you cope, you will return to your life. If not, you will have yourself to blame. Understand?" Jono's heart began to beat faster. Is he being offered to become some kind of mediator in dirty affairs? He never got involved with crime. At most, he worked part-time as a carpenter and taught children to surf. But now there is no choice. And, and how can I help with this?" he asked. "You are local, you have connections, people trust you. And I am a stranger with a bad reputation. Surely you have friends who can put pressure on the right landowners. Or you can have a nice conversation yourself. You can persuade them as much as you like, just to convince them to sign the necessary papers." He looked towards the ocean. "If you disobey, run away, or warn them that I'm behind this, well, I'm afraid your mother might get hurt, and anyone you care about." At that moment, Jono felt as if a cold needle had pierced his heart. He remembered the face of his mother, who, suspecting nothing, prepares him breakfast and rejoices at the return of her son. "Okay," he squeezed out, realizing that he had no other choice. "I'll do what I can." Eddie grinned. "Well done. I knew that you were not completely stupid." He nodded to the thug, who knocked the air out of Jono's lungs. He walked away. "So listen, we will meet here tomorrow afternoon. Bring me the results of your negotiations. If everything goes as it should, we'll see what happens next. But keep in mind, people are watching me, watching your every move. Don't you dare go to the police or anything else. Is everything clear?" Jono nodded, feeling hatred and fear boiling inside him at the same time. "Sure." Eddie looked around the empty pier. "Great. Then let's not delay. I'll give you a day. And remember, I'm not kidding. Don't think for a second, otherwise your life will turn into hell." He paused. "And don't forget about Gracie. She, of course, is more to blame than you. But I will deal with her separately." With these words, he turned and moved towards the car, throwing a mocking note over his shoulder. "Nice to meet you, Jono." When the black foreign car drove away, Jono fell to his knees right on the old boards of the pier and cursed the day when he stayed at that hotel. The pain was subsiding, but the main pain, the understanding of what he had gotten himself into, was only flaring up. Returning home, he found his mother preparing dinner. Trying not to show what state he was in, Jono began to eat. At some point, she noticed that he had an abrasion on his cheek. "Fell?" she asked with a mixture of concern and surprise. "Or got into a fight with someone?" "I stumbled on the pier, Mom," he lied, not daring to look her in the eyes. "Be careful," she advised. He nodded, feeling tears welling up in his eyes. She has no idea how dangerous everything that is dear to him is now. He rose from the table, muttering that he needed to leave for a couple of hours. Driving his SUV, he frantically thought about how to comply with Eddie's demand without signing his own death sentence. He was in despair because if he really helped this bandit buy up land, he would become an accomplice in illegal machinations, and even betray his fellow countrymen. But if he does not agree, reprisals await him. No, I can't do this, he decided, approaching the idea that he needed to somehow find a way out. Maybe warn landowners not to negotiate with anyone. But then Eddie will figure it out, and revenge will be inevitable. He stopped at a bar near the embankment, a place where surfers, fishermen, and just local residents often gathered. Perhaps here he will find someone who has heard a lot of different stories and can give advice. But of course, he could not tell everything frankly. Inside the bar, which smelled of beer and fried fish, he saw Dave, an old friend and partner in the rescue club. He looked up, saw Jono, and joyfully called out, "Hey buddy, you're back. How was your trip?" Jono shrugged. "Yes, okay. Listen, I have a conversation with you. Can I say a few words?" Dave noticed that he looked nervous and nodded. "Certainly. Let's go to the table in the corner." When they sat down, Jono was silent for a few seconds, thinking about what exactly to say. Finally, he spoke. "Listen, I have big problems. A guy from the mafia is threatening me. He wants me to convince some people to sell him land. But it might be illegal, and these people definitely don't want to sell." Dave whistled. "Crap. So what are you going to do?" "Don't know. Leaving is not an option. I have my mother and all my friends here. And if I did not comply with his demands, I'm afraid he will deal with me and her." Dave drummed his fingers on the table. "The police?" Jono shook his head. "They are watching this. They warned me that anything I said to the cops would kill me. And who knows if the police in neighboring cities have not been bought." They sat in heavy silence until Dave exhaled. "Look, I don't know all the details, of course, but here's what. If these landowners find out that Eddie Torelli is hitting on them, maybe they'll hire good lawyers or bodyguards themselves. But how do you warn them without revealing yourself?" Jono rubbed his temples. "That's it. If I tell them the truth, it will get back to Eddie, and then he will destroy me." Dave was thinking hard, and suddenly his gaze hardened. "You've been saving people from drowning all your life, and now someone needs to save you, right?" Jono smiled wryly. "Yes, indeed. You know, I can suggest one thing. Try to stall for time. Tell Eddie that it's more complicated than it seems, that you need to get some papers. Maybe while you're stalling, I'll try to find contacts of guys who can help. I don't know journalists or someone else who isn't afraid of Torelli. The main thing is not to remain silent, but look for a way out." "Okay," Jono finally answered. He shook Dave's hand and left the bar, feeling a tiny spark of hope. Maybe, indeed, if you take your time wisely, you will be able to come up with something. But he realized he only had a day before meeting Eddie, and if the plan doesn't work, the consequences will be catastrophic. Eddie, meanwhile, sat in his office, connected to a video conference with lawyers and partners. They looked like serious people talking about building a new complex. However, some of them were gray intermediaries linking legal businesses with criminal capital. He was burdened by the need to personally deal with the issue of buying land. Usually such little things were decided by other members of his organization, but here we were talking about a large and long-term project. You can't lose. And Gracie, his beautiful wife, gave reason to doubt that everything was under control in his family. Having concluded the conference, he turned off the camera and leaned back in his chair. His gaze slid to the photograph of Gracie, who 5 years ago was shining with happiness in their wedding photos. "She dared to betray me. Retribution awaits her too," he thought, clenching his fists. "But first of all, we must end the land issue and this dunce Jono." Meanwhile, Bruno called him, reporting on the meeting on the pier. Everything went without incident, except for a couple of blows. Eddie grinned with satisfaction. Okay, let him know his place. In the evening, he returned home and found Gracie in the living room. She was sitting with her legs crossed, with a detached look. Hearing his steps, she quickly stood up. "Hello, Eddie." He looked at her intently, anger still flashing in his eyes. "Is dinner ready?" "Yes," she whispered. "I cooked pasta." "Great," he said. "Carry it." There was a heavy silence at the table. Eddie ate slowly, trying to maintain a semblance of calm. Gracie made herself a plate, but barely touched the food. She knew that if she spoke first, she might anger him. And silence also kills because the unknown is the worst thing. Finally, when Eddie put down his fork, he spoke quietly. "Today I saw your friend, if you can call him that." Gracie winced, dropping a piece of bread. Mine?" "Yes, Jono." "The same one." He paused, enjoying the way her eyes widened in horror. "Don't worry, as long as he's alive. And he will live if he does what I said. You understand?" She nodded, not daring to contradict. "You see, Gracie," he continued in the same even voice, "I won't forget what you did to me." "Never. But if you're obedient, maybe I won't." He paused terribly, pushed this situation too far. She didn't know what to answer. Tears came to my eyes. Despite all the luxurious gifts, travel, and outwardly beautiful life, she lived for years in fear of his dark side. And only now I realized how naive it was to look for romance on the side without expecting retribution. I will do whatever you say," she whispered. "I know," he answered coldly and stood up from the table. "Get yourself in order. There will be guests tonight, and you need to look perfect." He left, throwing the dirty napkin on the table. Gracie cried quietly, realizing that she was in a trap from which she could see no escape. Time passed painfully slowly for everyone involved in this drama. But every step inexorably brought the denouement closer. The next morning, Jono woke up and realized that he could no longer put off the meeting. He made some attempts to reach out to the owners of the land, but not directly, but through his friends, hinting that they needed to lie low and not sell anything to anyone. How much this will protect them is a question. After all, if they simply refuse to sell, Eddie may resort to threats or force, and then a real war will begin. At the agreed time, Jono arrived at the pier again. The sky was cloudy and the wind was gusty. Eddie's car was already waiting, but this time Eddie didn't get out. Only Bruno appeared from the car and waved his hand. "Sit down," he said. The boss was sick and couldn't come. Jono sat in the back seat, feeling his heart pounding in his chest. Inside, in addition to Bruno, there were two more apparently personal security. "Well, report," Bruno said gloomily, turning on the voice recorder on his phone. Jono tried to explain that while people do not agree to sell, he is negotiating with them. Tries to find those who can influence. Bruno looked at him with narrowed eyes. "The boss says you had 24 hours. Where are any papers, contracts? I can't do it in a hurry." "We need more time," Jono tried to justify himself. Bruno listened silently, then nodded briefly. "Okay, I'll tell the boss, but keep in mind, he doesn't like being fooled. He told me to warn you. You have two options: either you really advance the matter, or we take on this differently, and then you won't be happy." He gave Jono a business card. "Call this number tomorrow evening and tell me what your progress is. If you don't call, you know." With these words, Bruno opened the door, indicating that the conversation was over. Jono got out, and the car immediately drove off, showering him with gravel from under the wheels. When Eddie later listened to the recording of their conversation, he cursed angrily. The boy hasn't really done anything yet. Perhaps he doesn't know how to do such things. It's hard to demand something like that from an ordinary guy. But Eddie was not going to back down. He would simply tighten the screws until Jono broke down and did what was required. Or he won't die. However, even in Eddie's soul, a doubt arose. Shouldn't he resort to more familiar methods of intimidating the owners themselves? Why does he need this game with Jono? Yes, he wanted to humiliate his wife's lover, to use him as a puppet. But business and time are more important than personal revenge. He leaned back in his chair and looked up at Gracie, who was cleaning his office. Was this revenge on that guy really worth the effort? Or is he angry not at the young lover, but at himself, who allowed his wife to be disappointed in their relationship? Gracie felt his gaze and froze. Several seconds passed in which her heart beat at a breakneck speed. "Is everything okay, Eddie?" she dared to ask. He remained silent, looking past her, through the window into the courtyard. Then, as if waking up, he waved his hand. "Continue." She nodded and, lowering her head, continued her work. During the couple of days that Jono spent in painful thoughts, rumors began to circulate in the town that a certain mafioso was showing an active interest in the coastal lands. Landowners suddenly began to notice suspicious people near their houses. However, no one has yet received any official purchase offers. Dave continued to search for people who could help bring the case to publicity and protect the locals. But time was running out, and there was no real plan on how to protect ourselves and others. When evening came and Jono called Bruno at the appointed hour, he answered coldly. "What progress? There are several potential options," Jono lied. "One owner is ready to consider the offer, but wants a formal contract. Others require more time." "Time is running out, buddy," Bruno said. "The boss wants everything to be decided in a week. Otherwise, your mission will not end in your favor." The connection was interrupted. Jono stared at the phone in despair. Conducting a major purchase and sale transaction of several plots of land in a week, especially against the will of the owners, is unrealistic. Most likely, Eddie already has a power plan and is simply putting the pressure on Jono for his own personal reasons. On the third day, Gracie sat in the garden, trying to find peace at least in the singing of birds and the rustling of leaves. But my soul was torn by fear and guilt. She didn't know how Jono lived or what danger he was in. Eddie barely spoke to her, only made monosyllabic remarks, ordering her to do household chores and stay close. Maybe I should run away, she thought, peering at the high fence. But where? Without money, without influential friends, under the constant surveillance of Eddie's people. All these years of luxurious life have turned into a cage from which there is no escape. Suddenly, she heard the front door slam. It's Eddie back. Gracie realized that the time for daydreaming in the fresh air was over. She got up and entered the house. "Come here," he ordered, standing at the living room window. She obediently approached. "Pack your things. Tomorrow we are going to the coast." Her heart began to pound. "Why, Eddie? You didn't say you wanted to go there again." He smiled coldly. "I decided to take care of business issues myself. And I'm taking you with me so that you can see what your pranks lead to." She trembled, guessing that a meeting with Jono could happen at any moment and in her presence. "How will this end for both?" "But I don't have to do anything there, right?" she asked timidly. "No to you," he turned to her. "But I want you to be near. I think it will be helpful if the guy sees your face when I'm done with him. Maybe this will pull the rug out from under him." Everything inside her broke down. "I'm finishing things with him." It sounded creepy. So, perhaps he is planning the worst. And now he will do it in front of her eyes, so that she can feel what a mistake she made. She nodded, not daring to object, although inside she was screaming in horror. At dawn, they were already driving in an armored black SUV, accompanied by a security car. Gracie silently looked out the window, not seeing any scenery. Her legs were trembling, and only fear kept her conscious. Eddie was on the phone giving orders. She understood from snippets of conversation that he was going to meet some people at a local bar that evening. Jono might be among them. The journey took almost 4 hours. Stopping at a closed boarding house that belonged to Eddie's friend, the whole group settled into rooms. Gracie received separate apartments, but understood that she was still being watched. She sat on the bed, looking at the gray sea outside the window. Strong waves were hitting the shore, as if nature was also angry. Jono received a call from Bruno that same day. "The boss has arrived in town. He wants to see you today. At the Storm Bar on the embankment. At 9 o'clock in the evening." "Got it," Jono croaked, his throat dry. My heart was beating against my ribs. Damn, this is much faster than I thought. He tried to talk to Dave again, but he just threw up his hands. "I don't have time to find someone serious who would agree to oppose Torelli. Nobody wants to quarrel with the mafia. Sorry, buddy." Realizing that he had to take the risk alone, Jono stood in front of the mirror. His face bore a fresh bruise from the blow Eddie's guard had given him on the pier. "We'll meet them at the bar again, and who knows if I'll end up lying there on the floor." However, he found a small ray of determination within himself. He would not allow his mother to be dragged into this, and he would not let them just take away the land from the locals. Okay, whatever happens, he muttered under his breath. Evening came quickly. The Storm Bar was a spacious, but rather dark establishment with wooden tables and old-style neon signs. Usually it's noisy here, but this time the atmosphere was strangely tense. Many regulars noticed that surly, tough guys in suits were sitting at one of the tables, and two more were looming at the entrance. When Jono entered the bar, he immediately saw Eddie at the far table. Next to him was Gracie, her eyes downcast. Bruno and two other thugs positioned themselves on the sides. It looked like they deliberately took a large table in the corner so that no one would interfere. Jono swallowed hard and walked towards them. Another big guy came in right behind him, covering the exit. "Sit down," Eddie said coldly. The guy sat down on a chair, trying not to look at Gracie, although he felt her looking up at him with a pleading look. "Well," Eddie began, "are you making any progress, or are you just stalling for time?" Jono, gathering his will, spoke. "Look, I really tried to find an approach to the landowners, but they don't need your money. For many, this is the land of their ancestors. For others, it is a business that feeds their families. They don't want to sell." "So you didn't try hard," growled one of the thugs. Eddie raised his palm, calling for calm. "And what do you propose? For me to refuse a deal for some fools? No, boy, that doesn't happen." Jono understood that now was the decisive moment. "Eddie," he called him by name for the first time, "you understand that everyone on the coast has strong ties. If you start applying force, there will be a lot of noise, the press, the police may get involved. You definitely don't need this." Torelli stared at him, tilting his head to the side. "Are you teaching me how to do business?" "I offer an alternative," Jono continued. "You can build a complex on another site, which is free and does not belong to private owners. These are municipal lands, and it is easier to negotiate through the council. Yes, you will have to spend money, but there will be fewer conflicts." Eddie frowned. "Do you think I don't know about this? The municipality asked for too high a fee for the permit, and there the environmental committee can also put a spoke in the wheels. But this is safer than trying to forcefully take out plots from people who will loudly shout about the violation of their rights. The ocean and the land are dear to everyone here. You can't just come and grab it." Now Bruno spoke. "Boss, he's lying. He just wants us to get out of this thing." Eddie looked up at Gracie, searching her face for some kind of reaction. She sat as pale as a sheet, feeling that everything could end in blood. "Yes, maybe he does," Eddie answered, getting up from the table. "But I don't have time for squabbles. I was going to solve everything peacefully by buying plots. If it doesn't work out, let's go another way. And let's start," he took a step towards Jono, "with you." The guy tensed, anticipating the blow. But at that moment, Gracie jumped up from her chair and grabbed Eddie's hand. "Eddie, please, don't do this. Stop it," Eddie turned around sharply and backhanded her with the back of his hand. The bar's patrons gasped, but no one dared to intervene. "Shut up, fool," he hissed. "Don't you dare interfere in a man's conversation." Jono, involuntarily screaming, rushed towards Gracie, trying to help her get up. But one of the thugs grabbed him and hit him in the back with his elbow. Jono collapsed on the floor, struggling to breathe. "I could finish you here and now," Eddie hissed, breathing heavily with rage, "but then everything would turn out too loud. So take him out. We'll figure it out when we get to a quieter place." Two big men picked up Jono, who was literally hanging from their arms. Gracie lay with her hand pressed to her lips, from which blood was oozing. Eddie didn't even look at her. He was filled with anger and humiliation. The very fact that his wife stood up for her lover added fuel to the fire. "Let's go," he growled, heading towards the exit. Thus ended the evening at the Storm Bar. Several visitors hastily ran out into the street. Someone ran to call the police, but everyone understood that contacting the Mafia clan was a huge risk. The wind was raging outside, blowing from the ocean. The column of cars quickly moved off, taking away Jono and Gracie, each of whom understood that there was a denouement ahead, where the stakes were their lives and freedom. The continuation was supposed to happen in the coming hours, and no one could predict what the ending of this story of betrayal, revenge, and a reckless attempt to save your life and the lives of those you love would turn out to be. The column of cars quickly drove away from the Storm bar. Inside the armored SUV leading the way, Eddie Torelli sat in the back seat, eyebrows drawn together. Bloodshot eyes betrayed rage and resentment, which only grew stronger. Opposite him, sitting hunched over, was Jono, who was held by the shoulders by two of Eddie's strong fighters. Gracie was squeezed in next to him. Although she wanted to be as far away from her husband as possible, she was instinctively afraid of another blow. The streets were in twilight. The rain, which had broken through in the last half hour, washed away passers-by from the embankment and now only lashed the windshields of cars. A few minutes later, the entire procession left the outskirts of the town, turning towards the deserted coast, from where a view of the stormy sea opened up. "We've gone a long way, boss," Bruno said quietly, looking in the rearview mirror. "Okay," Eddie said. "No one will interfere here." He turned to Jono, who sat with his head bowed, trying in vain to relieve the pain in his lower back. "Let me remind you, boy, I always get things done. You had a chance to do everything right, but you missed it. Your tales about another piece of land are just an attempt to confuse me. I don't like being considered a fool." "Eddie," Jono dared to answer, catching his breath, "I was telling the truth. After all, you yourself can see that people will not sell their plots. Please, that's enough." "Enough?" Eddie's eyebrows arched with contempt. "Did you think it would all end quickly? No, buddy, you made a mistake. You slept with my wife and failed my expectations in business. You can't get away with any of these things." He glanced at Gracie. "And so you understand, my love," he said the last word with a mockery. "You shouldn't relax either. You can't get away from me." Gracie looked at him with widened eyes in horror. There is no longer any sympathy or tenderness in him that he once had. All that remained was the weapon in the form of his power and rage. "Eddie," she whispered, "I beg you, no blood." He didn't answer, just leaned back in his seat and gave a short order to the driver. "Turn to the abandoned pier." Soon the cars stopped near the old cargo pier, where fishing boats once moored. Now decay and darkness reigned here, only dim lanterns swayed brokenly in the wind, illuminating the wet asphalt and piles of rusty metal. The waves rumbled somewhere behind a wall of stones and broken wooden piles. The guards pulled Jono out of the car. He staggered, trying to stay on his feet. Gracie was released next, and she followed her husband on stiff legs. The sea wind whipped raindrops into my face, and my clothes immediately got wet. "This way," Eddie said. He walked towards the concrete platform that lined the remains of the pier. Bruno and the second thug led Jono, not giving him a chance to escape or resist. Gracie walked behind, wrapping her arms around herself from cold and fear. "There used to be warehouses here," Eddie said, mostly to himself. "Once upon a time, I even thought of investing in a project and turning these hangars into closed halls for parties. But everything went wrong." He turned to Jono. "I seem to have a talent for finding losers and damned places." He stopped at the very edge of the platform. The seething waves were black below. Eddie still clutched his wet jacket to himself and, gritting his teeth, took a pistol out of his pocket. I looked at him, then at Jono. "I could have killed you back in the bar, but I decided to give you a grand finale. Got it, right?" He spoke quietly, but his voice sounded ominous. "I want you to feel that I really can do anything." So Gracie could see it, so that everyone around you understands who you shouldn't joke with. Jono swallowed, hunching his shoulders even though the guards were holding him tightly next to him. Never before had he felt so helpless. He imagined footage of his own death. No, he cannot end his life like this because of a fatal night meeting in a hotel. "Eddie," Gracie suddenly said, taking a step towards her husband, "everything could be different with us. Please don't do this." I will go anywhere with you. I will do whatever you say. Just let him go. This won't solve anything, his death." Torelli tilted his head, narrowing his eyes. Do you forgive him his debt? Are you protecting him even now? A new explosion of jealousy flashed in his eyes. How dare you? She took a deep breath, trying to gather her courage. You are my husband, I didn't love him. It was a mistake. This was all just a pathetic attempt to find what was missing in our marriage. But Eddie, I don't want anyone to die for this. For a moment there was a hint of doubt, or perhaps pain, in Eddie's eyes. But he immediately turned his gaze to the pistol in his hand, as if remembering what he had come for. He raised his weapon, aiming it straight at Jono's chest. The guards held the guy, not allowing him to move. Well, buddy, do you have any last word? Jono looked straight down the barrel. A wheeze escaped from my throat. If you shoot, you still won't get what you want. The earth, the people, everyone will hate you. They will resist. The press will start digging. You don't need that kind of train. I don't care, Eddie barked. Do you think I can't hush up the matter? I can do anything. But the main thing is that I will not allow anyone to humiliate me and sleep with my wife with impunity. That same night, deathly silence reigned in Eddie Torelli's mansion. Gracie sat in her room, her back pressed against the door. As soon as they returned, Eddie gave her a short, "Stay in order." She understood. He was at his limit. Through the closed door, she heard the guards talking quietly downstairs, then the front door slammed. Eddie had probably gone out into the night, perhaps to numb the pain with a drink or take care of some new business. The next morning, news spread throughout the city. Someone had seen a fight taking place at the old pier, and shots were heard. But the police, when they arrived, just shrugged their shoulders, no concrete evidence, no statement. Witnesses chose to remain silent. Thus ended that crazy night when three people, bound by chance and passion, faced the abyss of jealousy and power. Gracie remained in a rich house turned into a prison, and Eddie Torelli, powerful in the criminal world, for the first time felt that all the money and power could not return what had once been destroyed inside him: faith in love and his own omnipotence. The story of their connections did not receive a loud ending in police reports or newspaper headlines, but the echoes of what happened will remain with each of them forever, and only the sound of the surf and the howling of the wind over the deserted pier will retain the roar of that night for a long time, the roar of shots, thunder, and desperate screams. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think. Click to the next one. Click to the next one. Click to the next one. Click to the